Alaska, where the American frontier is still big, wild, and extreme. And so are the jobs. Going to work in this dangerous territory means the chance to strike it rich. The adventure of a lifetime. And the very real prospect of never making it back alive. Getting around the vast, rugged territory is one of the most vexing difficulties of working in Alaska. There are just 14,000 miles of roads in the entire state, less than are in Los Angeles alone. In this roadless wilderness, flying in small planes has become a necessity of life. There's one plane to every 60 Alaskans. That's 16 times the national average. In the Wrangell-St. Elias Mountains, Paul Klaus is aiming his Piper Super Cub into one of the most treacherous landscapes on Earth. He's a rare breed, a bush pilot who specializes in flying in Alaska's high mountains. To survive out here takes a special ability to read the terrain, bad weather, and vicious winds.
I look at wind like water. Wind flows and it has the same kind of characteristics that a river does. You know, there's places I've been many, many times where you're totally safe, you're fine, but just on the other side of the ridge, it'd kill you.
Mountain pilots tempt fate for a simple reason. They get paid to do it. Hunters, climbers, and skiers hire Paul Klaus to bring them into remote locations. In the hardscrabble wilds of Alaska, it's one way to make money and survive, if you don't die trying. Thousands of planes have crashed and hundreds of bush pilots have died since the 1930s while flying through Alaska's unforgiving mountains. This lethal job was born during the Great Depression, when a fearless pilot, desperate to earn a buck, risked his life flying where no plane had ever gone before. In Seattle, in 1932, a young, unemployed pilot spent his last few dollars on a steamship ticket to Anchorage, Alaska. Bob Reeve had cut his teeth flying airmail routes in South America. Now he headed north to seek his fortune.
I think he was, more than anything, looking for a way to fly and make money flying. And probably the word maybe was that some pilots are doing it up in Alaska and there might be an opportunity there. And he arrived here pretty broke, like a lot of the pilots did in those days.
Reeve landed in Valdez, a small fishing port on Alaska's southern coast. There was very little paying work for an aviator, but Valdez did have one thing going for it: gold. Rich deposits had been discovered in the nearby Chugach Mountains. But the gold veins were bound up in solid rock. To get it out, the miners had to blast the ground apart with dynamite. The ore was crushed with stamp mills on site to extract the gold. To operate the high mines, tons of heavy milling equipment had to be hauled up the steep mountains. The only way in was by pack horse, which took weeks and was expensive. Operators charged $600 per ton, the price of a new Chevrolet car in 1933. Bob Reeve saw his opportunity. By plane, he could fly to the mines in just hours, charge as little as $100 a ton, and still make a profit. But could he do it without killing himself, as many other pilots already had in Alaska's peaks? The mines were high on mountainsides, where the only landing areas were snow-covered glacier fields. They were riddled with deep crevasses, wide enough to swallow an airplane whole. Bob Reeve was desperate enough to take the risk. His plane was a 300 horsepower Fairchild 51 that could carry half a ton of bulky machinery. Reeve removed the wheels and replaced them with homemade wooden skis. On April 5th, 1933, Reeve lifted off on his first trip to the Big Four mine, located 30 miles away and 6,000 feet high. Flying over the site, he saw that the only possible landing area was a small and steep ice field. Then Reeve lost his depth of field. The overcast sky merged with the snow, making everything look flat white. Suddenly, the glacier loomed up ahead. Luckily, deep snow cushioned the rough landing and the plane was unharmed. After digging out, the cargo was safely delivered to the nearby mine. Bob Reeve had pulled off the first ever aerial delivery to a mountaintop mine. Once summer came and the snow melted in Valdez, Reeve had to put wheels back on to land and take off on the runway. But this meant he couldn't land on the snow-covered glaciers. He tried delivering supplies to the high mines with aerial drops, but these bombing runs resulted in too many damaged goods. Reeve came up with an innovative solution. Take off from the tidal mudflats in Valdez Bay with his skis on. He fashioned a pair of skis out of a stainless steel bar top. The metal skis were slick and would be rust-proof in the salt water. On the trial run, the plane taxied easily across the wet flats. But when Reeve tried to lift off, the soupy mud gripped the skis. Careening toward shore at 50 miles per hour, Reeve yanked back hard on the stick. Just before running into the trees, the plane broke free of the mud and was airborne. Reeve's one-of-a-kind mudflat airport was a messy operation, but it worked. The business took off. Bob Reeve had found his dangerous niche.
Bob just had more guts than the other pilot. He was willing to take chances that they weren't willing to take.
In 1937, Reeve's daredevil flying came to the attention of Brad Washburn, one of America's boldest and most celebrated mountaineers.
I remember the letter I wrote. I told him just what we wanted to do, and his response was, "Anywhere you'll ride, I'll fly, Bob Reeve." That was my introduction to him.
Washburn wanted to scale North America's highest unclimbed peak, 17,000-foot high Mount Lucania. Located deep in the St. Elias Range, Lucania was remote even by Alaskan standards. So Washburn hatched a bold plan. Have Reeve airlift the climbers from Valdez and land them on the mountain at an elevation of 8,500 feet. A successful flight would set the world altitude record for ski plane landing. Failure would mean disappearing off the face of the map.
He thought we were stupid as hell because, why would anybody want to climb these damn mountains? When this was all over, he said he'd never do that again.
On June 18th, the expedition lifted off. Heavily laden with gear and passengers, the gutsy pilot carried just enough fuel to get to the mountain and back. The route passed over 300 miles of wild, uninhabited country. There was no place to refuel and no margin for error. 3 hours later, they were over the St. Elias ice cap, a system of glaciers the size of New England. Rising up out of the ice was their destination, Mount Lucania. Reeve picked out a plateau at 8,500 feet. The snow surface looked stable, so he came in for a landing. But as soon as the skis touched down, disaster struck.
And this changed the whole Lucania story, that landing.
Bob Reeve's amazing run of good luck in Alaska's unforgiving mountains had just ended. While landing at 8,500 feet on Mount Lucania in the Wrangell-St. Elias Mountains, Bob Reeve's plane had hit the mouth of a hidden crevasse. In Alaska, these fissures, formed by a glacier's slow but constant movement, can measure up to 200 feet deep. In winter, new snowfall covers a crevasse, creating a thick, strong bridge across the opening. But in summer, when the new snow begins to melt, the bridge is transformed into a deadly trapdoor. Stuck in a quicksand of soft snow, the plane and men could fall through at any time.
Bob said, "I'll never fly back to this goddamn place as long as I live." He said, "My only interest now is getting back to Valdez alive."
After hours of back-breaking work, they were finally able to free the plane. But the glacier's surface was still too soft to risk a takeoff. So the stranded party hunkered down to wait for the temperature to drop and the snow to harden. After 4 days camped on the exposed glacier, a cold spell set in. Reeve had fuel enough for one last try. Throttle wide open, the pilot gunned the plane down the mountain.
And he had to go into a little hollow and he disappeared. And we said, "Oh my God, he's crashed." No, but then he reappeared, waggled his wings.
Bob Reeve had narrowly escaped an icy grave, but he now faced a long and hazardous flight home. The climbers were left on their own. For the next 2 weeks, they ascended Mount Lucania, reaching the summit on July 9th, the first ever to do so. Then they began the long trek to the nearest settlement 100 miles away in Yukon, Canada. The two made it out 10 days later on the edge of starvation. Once airborne, Bob Reeve had to confront his own long odds of survival. He was low on fuel, with 300 miles of wilderness left to cross.
They had no radio communications, and if you went out and didn't come back, it could indicate that you were just stuck in the snow somewhere, or you were weathered in somewhere, or you had crashed. And after a certain amount of time had passed, then they would go looking for you.
4 hours later, the engine running on fumes, Reeve set down safely in Valdez.
The way it worked out, it made a hell of a story.
It was Bob Reeve's closest call, but he had once again defied the odds. Reeve went on to make 2,000 glacier landings and haul more than 1 million pounds of cargo into the mountains. His daredevil flying laid the groundwork for the next big rush on Alaska's high peaks.